I wanted to make a pro-abortion argument and just throw a couple of premises out there and see if you agree.
Okay, I am not pro-abortion. I'm pro-choice.
Yeah, I realize that, so I'm going to argue a bit more on the side of pro-abortion, um, just for the reason that I see a lot of this is focused around the rights of the mother, which is well and good, but there's also a little bit of an issue with the child that is to be born, in that one problem is you cannot get consent from the child before they're born. And if this child is born with health issues or suffers misfortune in their life, they could be caught in a predicament, especially more obviously now that the climate change is becoming more and more of a reality. So I would argue that it is actually a method of reducing suffering. And so I would think that abortion could be considered as a moral imperative or a moral obligation, um, in the framework of.
Yeah, I fundamentally disagree with that outlook. I think anti-natalism is wrong in almost every way. Yeah, no, I don't because I don't think that you can something like this. You can't say that it didn't consent because it didn't exist. There was nothing to consent because it didn't exist.
Right. Okay. Well, the only way to remedy that, what I'm saying is that this child never had a say. It was only the mother and the father that had any say. And so when you have someone that comes into existence and suffers greatly, they're in a
I don't.
predicament. So in that case, I would argue that you
I don't think
have.
that that's their responsibility though. That's
How is it not their responsibility when they're the ones that initiated the existence of this person?
because that's what I'm saying. Like because what you're describing is this person didn't consent, but the person wasn't there, and so that's why you can't say that like the person is like being aggressed upon because there's nothing to aggress upon. It doesn't exist.
Well, according to the argument you had with the other guy, let's just say at conception, or let's say let's just talk about the fetus then. So the fetus is now it's in the process of growing, and the parents actually have a knowledge of the world that they're in. So I mean, I don't even think that you need to have the child to protest. The parents could just be seen as negligent because they're ignoring the reality of climate change, or pick another
And we
calamity.
need people, but we need people to deal with climate change. Like we need people for that.
Yeah, but that's unethical to bring people into existence to solve your problems.
It's not so that they can solve problems. They don't have
Well,
to
it
solve
sounds.
problems if they don't want to.
Well, no, yeah, but you're saying you're bringing the person in because you need people to work on climate change.
I'm saying that because climate change is a thing, that's not an argument for never having children. I think that's a really bad argument.
That's not the whole argument.
So
That's
like
only
what
one thing.
like
I
if
think
we're
that's the
trying
most obvious
if
thing.
if we are trying to stop climate change, what are we doing it for if not for future generations? The impacts of climate change will not be felt in my lifetime. They will be felt in future generations' lifetime. So if you're saying we should just never have children, well then there's no point in trying to deal with climate change because there won't be any people after.
Well, we are already seeing the effects of climate change with heat
I'm
waves
saying
and
that
other.
the really depraved effects of climate change that will happen if we don't do anything. I'm saying, what is the point of trying to prevent that if there aren't future generations to protect?
Um, well, eventually life is going to end regardless through some means, whether that be some kind of celestial explosion or something else. So, I mean, it has to end sometime. And if, in fact, there was going to be some kind of prolonged suffering on a mass scale, I think it would be really regrettable if people didn't at least confront this idea. I think if you're going to bring someone into the world and you can't get consent, and you're going to do it anyway, I think
It's
society should make a
impossible. It's
trade-off.
impossible. You can't ask for consent from something that doesn't exist.
That is correct, and it doesn't make it any less problematic. So if someone shows up here and they suffer greatly, I think you have to have a very broad euthanasia law to go along with that, so that people at least have a choice to say, no, thank you. You brought me
So why
here.
wait, why don't we just try to make things better? Why don't we just try to make the world better? Why don't we do that?
Well, I don't think that it's working. I mean, look at all of the horrors that are going on around the world every
And
day
the and,
still.
and the chance of things getting better will be zero with the outlook that you're prescribing.
You mean by placing suffering as a central value?
I'm saying that we should not have kids, saying that like children exist, that we should not have future generations, I think is the epitome of nihilism, of saying that things will never get better, so we shouldn't try to make them better because things are bad right now.
Well, it's not nihilism, because nihilism is the denial of any value judgments being valid. I'm saying that you could have suffering and pleasure as values, and if you weigh those, I would say that it's pretty obvious that the suffering outweighs the pleasure on Earth.
I don't think that that's true, no. And I think that we can try and tip the scales to make it even better.
Well, why don't you think that's true? Have you really thought about it?
There are a lot of terrible, terrible things in the world, and every day I try to talk about how we can try and make things better. But that doesn't mean that there isn't pleasure and there isn't positive things in the world.
Well, I just wanted to throw this argument out there because I don't hear it on here very often, and
Well, I
I,
think it's a
I
really
think
bad argument, frankly. I do.
you
With all
think
due
it's a
respect,
you think do you think it's a trivial
yeah.
argument? Do
Well,
you
I'm
think
sorry.
it's a trivial? Do you think it's a trivial argument? Do you think that the concerns raised are somehow not important or
I think that
silly?
I think raising concerns about climate change is important. But when you say that the answer to climate change is just not have any more kids, I think that's a bad argument.
Yeah, there's people accusing me of needing mental help now.
Don't worry. Don't
I,
worry
I
about
just think
don't worry about the comments. Don't worry about the.
I just think, unfortunately, this is an argument that hasn't had its day, and I think that it is actually very vital. I think that the suffering that goes on is sometimes so bad, and if I have any kind of good in my
The
life, I
answer
would be willing
the
to.
answer is trying to make things better, not to say, oh, we'll just give up and there'll be no more future society.
Right, but that's aspirational, and you can't guarantee that. Yet you're still going to argue
You
that
can't,
people
but we still
can.
have to. We have to try though.
But why?
Why do we have to limit the suffering? To try and make things better, to maximize the pleasure and limit the suffering.
Right. So, what is the best way, the number one guaranteed way to prevent suffering?
What you're advocating also gets rid of the pleasure. Having no children, there's no one. There's no one then.
Okay, have you ever shed any tears about Mars not having people on it?
I no, I don't cry about that. No,
Why not?
because those people don't exist.
And what's the problem with that?
I don't think there's a problem with that.
Neither do I.
Okay.
So, why would there be a problem with ceasing procreation with the intent of making Earth like Mars?
I don't want to make Earth like Mars. I think Earth is a lot better than Mars.
You may not, but I think you just agreed with a lot of my premises.
I don't think I did. I agree. I don't cry because there's not people on Mars, but I don't think that has anything to do with saying that. I think Earth is a vastly superior planet to Mars. I think it's a much better planet to inhabit. I think it's a yeah.
Well, okay. I thank you for at least engaging the topic. So, I mean, that's a good thing. So, thank you very much.
Okay. Well, you have a great day. I wish I could hug him. I feel like a hug is necessary.